It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Smooth and Savvy is joined by some of the hottest talent in the entertainment industry, from musicians to authors and all those in between, along with our own Periscope girl. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here he is, Mr. Smooth and Savvy himself, Douglas Coleman.
Hi, ho, 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 hey, he, ha, all that good stuff. Welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, Douglas Coleman. How are ya? We got another full interview today. My interviews seem to be running longer and longer. I don't know if I'm just getting older and lazy or, just getting really interesting guests where we just don't want to stop talking. I really don't know what it is, but the interviews are getting longer, and so we have less time to chit-chat at the beginning of the show. So I'll just move right along. And last week I remember mentioning about I started on a diet. I've lost 10 pounds now, which is good, and I got to keep going. It's funny about putting on weight. I never put on weight for most of my life. And then it just seemed like all of a sudden the weight just kept coming on. And, first time it was like 10 pounds over and then 20. And you kind of say, well, all right. But I never really was successful at maintaining the weight. It just kind of kept creeping up and creeping up. And next time you went shopping for clothes, you bought the next size up and stuff. Finally, now I've gotten to where I was 50 pounds over. And I thought, well, that's a bit much, so I went on the diet. I've lost 10 pounds, so 40 more to go. Hopefully, I don't want to lose it too fast. Hopefully by the end of the year, I'll have it all off. I'll put some pictures up, just to help people. We have a guest coming up later in the month named Michael Temez, who also had a weight problem, only he lost 100 pounds, which was incredible. So he'll be coming up, and it's a very interesting interview. It's a very inspirational interview. He's got a book out for people to help people to achieve their weight goals if you're struggling with your weight. So tune into that one. Well, in case anybody's been wondering where our Periscope girl has been, she has not surfaced in several weeks. I think she is content to stay down in her submarine with her octopus Jenny. But she will be coming up. I did get a message over the wireless saying that she will be coming up, resurfacing and giving us a brand new report in the very near future. So please look forward to that. So without further ado, we will be right back with my special guest Robinn Lange after these commercial messages. Bondi Guest House in Jomtien Beach, Pattaya, Thailand. And their guest house offers beachfront accommodations with all rooms having sea views. Some rooms have balconies overlooking the sea as well. The Jomtien nightlife is within an easy stroll, and the beach is right outside your door. The attractions of Pattaya City nightlife are also just a few minutes ride away. Food is available 24 hours and offer a selection of European and Thai food. The owners, Colin and Malcolm, look forward to welcoming you to the Bondi. For more information, email Colin at bondipattaya, BONDIPATTAYA, at yahoo.co.uk. And if you do contact them, please mention that you heard about it on the Douglas Coleman Show.
Hi there, this is Stuart Epps from the UK, record producer, engineer. You might have heard of me. I've worked with artists from Elton John to Led Zeppelin to Bad Company, Twisted Sister, Robbie Williams, Oasis, many, many great bands and artists in the past and the present and hopefully in the future. But you can work with me as well. All you got to do is get in touch with me on eppsmusicproductions.com. That's EPPSproductionsmusic.com. And I can help you with your productions and with your recordings. A lot of people do home recordings now, which you can only take so far. Maybe they need a bit of professional help. So get in touch with me and we can sort it out. And thanks for Douglas Coleman for giving me the spot. Thanks a lot. Cheers, bye.
Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat.
Again?
Nothing up my sleeve. Presto! No doubt about it. I gotta get another hat.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
He has enjoyed success for over 35 years as an entertainer, agent, talent broker, producer, promoter, entertainment business trainer, coach, and consultant. Considered an expert in many facets of the entertainment business, Robinn has appeared on The Oprah Winfrey Show, Good Morning America, All My Children, VH1, ABC, CBS, and Fox TV News, and many local and regional radio and television shows nationwide. Throughout his career, he has had the opportunity to represent hundreds of artists and acts and work with many of the top names in the entertainment world, including George Burns, Steve Allen, Phyllis Diller, Tony Bennett, Tom Jones, Kenny Rogers, Willie Nelson, the Beach Boys, the Monkees, Loretta Lynn, Michael Jordan, and Don Rickles, as well as a virtual who's who of show business agents, producers, and other entertainment industry professionals. He is the author of The Entertainment Career and Business Opportunity Directory, a professional business resource detailing the top 40 live entertainment business opportunities available today. Okay, please welcome Robinn Lange. Hey, Robinn, how are you?
Fantastic. It's great to be here. How are you, Douglas?
Oh, fantastic, too. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
I was reading through your bio and your write-up. Sounds like you've had a pretty exciting life for the last, well, it says 35 years as an entertainer. How did you get started with all of this? Tell us about the last 35 years of your life.
Well, it all started, back in the late 60s and into the early 70s. Family bands were big. There were the Beach Boys and the Carpenters and the Cowsills and the Jacksons and the Osmonds. And my family had a band that was put together and did, schools and fairs and festivals and all kinds of different things. And I was a guitarist and my brother was the bass player and so on and so forth. So that's how it all started. And then it kind of evolved from there. It took some weird twists and turns. And when people hear the many different parts, it doesn't make a lot of sense unless you get the whole story. But I was in a band for many years, and I just, it was one of those things. Eventually, it became less of a family band as certain people were into it more than others, and others backed out, and we started bringing other people in and outsiders in. And one of the things that we just always seem to have problems with is I was the constant, and my brother for many years was a constant, but other people would come and go. And it was just so frustrating knowing your parts and you being ready to go out there and perform, but you had to wait and break other people in and get everybody else caught to speed. And geez, just about the time the drummer would get caught up to speed, the singer would quit. And oh my gosh, it was so, and you say it kind of sarcastically, but oh my gosh, it seemed like 4 months of the year we were always playing that game and only able to actually perform, the other 6 or 7 or 8 months. But and then eventually I decided, okay, well, I'm going to become a solo entertainer. And I've been a hypnotist, I've been a comedian, I've been a game show host, I've been all kinds of different things that I've done along the way. And I enjoy performing as a single much more. I'm my show. I don't have to rely heavily on other people. And one of the other things that happened back in the family days is we were represented by our own family, our parents and our agency. And we formed an agency, and that was always been an underlying thing of everything I've done, is I've always had this balance between being the artist and having the creative side that wanted to perform, but I just as equally as much enjoyed the business side of entertainment. I would watch Johnny Carson and all these other shows, and you would hear people talk about their managers and their agents and their producers, and for some reason that just intrigued the heck out of me. And literally, I was just about as aggressive in learning the business side of entertainment as I was in being a performer.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I know a lot of musicians primarily who have no business sense at all. It doesn't seem to run hand in hand that they would be equally as interested in the business. It's almost as if they have to have somebody to hold their hand, to budget the money, to otherwise they just would have no clue and all the money would be gone and they wouldn't know what to spend it on. So it's very interesting.
It's not just musicians. I find that in most kinds of artists, and I think it's because they'd rather focus on the creative side. And I came up in a time where people like the Turtles and a lot of the groups in the mid-'60s, American groups, and then even into the 70s and 80s, and a lot of these guys just got so taken advantage of in their record deals. I mean, look at John Fogerty. There's another guy who couldn't even use his own name for how long. And same for Mark and Howard from the Turtles. They had to create Flo and Eddie just to be able to, till all the legalities with their label and the lawsuits got ironed out. So I think that's kind of a common thing that I've noticed throughout any kind of entertainment or artistic endeavors. And they would rather have somebody else handle that facet. The question is, and the concern becomes finding somebody that A, gets them, and B, they can trust.
True. And I think it's gone a bit more that way now, with music being a very DIY climate where everybody's doing their own home recordings and things. It's not the artist's or the musician's career is more in their own hands than it was 30 years ago, when you had to go to someone else's.
More proactive,
right?
Like you said,
yeah,
because of technology and because of just the social world with social media and independent labels and independent recordings, and I think they're learning more. They're more hands-on, and I think artistically that gives them some more creative freedom too. But I just think the times that we're in kind of makes them have to be a little more privy to both sides of the equation.
Well, I think you're right, even though they might not like it or might not have a very good sense of it, especially when you're producing your own music these days and you're putting it out yourself on Spotify and all those things. That was never possible 30 or 40 years ago. You really were in the hands of somebody else, a record label. Now that you can put it out yourself, I think it's probably a good idea to count your own pennies as they come in,
Well, it's funny. I remember hearing stories back in the 80s of MC Hammer when he couldn't get picked up by a label. He was selling albums and singles out of the trunk of his car. And, that, in its time, that was probably the equivalent or the beginning of, if you can't get somebody to do this for you or understand who you are, take it into your own hands. And, I remember Boston's first album was done in their, basement recording studio.
Right,
and
yeah.
allowing them to be much more hands-on and do things their way. And, I think a lot of people, and the rap music started quite similarly. And, I think if you can endure for the long haul, there can be a payoff. And I think now the whole independent movement is very strong. I mean, labels are struggling.
Well, that's true. I mean, the major labels, and
yeah,
because there's so much competition with indie. Well, and thanks to technology, they've taken a lot of the power away from the major labels. The major labels don't really control distribution anymore. Anyone can put a song out and have it on iTunes right next to McCartney and Elton John. Whether or not it sells is another story.
Well, see, that's just it. It's the promotion, and that's always where the labels kind of had an artist. I mean, when you really get down to it, when you had a recording deal, a lot of the label kind of fronted the artist the money to record the project, and then you went out on the road and used their promotional machine to try to recoup their cost that they put into you before you really saw much of anything. Now that's kind of an abbreviated overview of it, but the point is they had the power in it's our money, we've got our label and we've got our distribution. They kind of held most of the cards to the game, and like you say, you take some of that away from them, and I'm not even convinced their promotional machines are what they used to be either, because that used to be the only way, or the only hard-hitting, serious way to do things. And now with social media and people doing things on their own and technology, it entails an artist being a little more hands-on. But you know what? There's a little bigger piece of the pie if you can make it happen.
I think the playing field has really been leveled, and a lot of indie artists are doing quite well on their own with social media and selling. People aren't really buying music anymore, not like they used to, because everybody wants it for free. It's your choice of going on YouTube and streaming the video for free, or buying the CD. Nobody's buying it. But you can make a decent living if you can get your music out there for enough people. It's a lot of pennies, though, for Spotify. For 1 cent a play, that's a hell of a lot of pennies.
It's still a long haul, and it's given them a little more creative freedom, and it's given them a little more hands-on. And I guess you could say it's made it easier, but it is by no means anything that's like you say. It's even the playing field, but it certainly hasn't tilted it in the artist's favor. Where I know a lot of artists resisted a lot of this, especially the artists that had already been established from the label system.
Right.
And it's good to see more artists embracing it and trying to figure it out and try to, make it happen for themselves. But it's still, like you say, with people not buying, you got to make a splash, and it's very grassroots.
That's very true. Well, let's move on a little bit with your story. So you were doing the family band, and then that wasn't going, and you were doing your own entertaining. Now, how did you make the transformation into the management side of the entertainment business?
Well, I was doing, I always had this yin and yang kind of thing where if I was working the road or performing too much, there was a part of me that wanted to, I just love to go to the office every day and do the business side of things, more management and representation. And then, I would do that for a period of time and say, gosh, I'm booking all these other entertainers and I'm hearing them and they're doing this. I'm one of those entertainers that has always loved being on the road. I love traveling. I love buses. I love, vans. I love hotels. I just,
wow.
I don't know how to explain it. A lot of people think you're nuts, but I loved it. And being away from it too often, or for too long, I would miss that and kind of long for that. So I would always go back and forth. And then I got married and had a daughter, and it was like, that whole, I've got to try to be home more, and I've got to be more grounded, and I've got to be more, in those days, I remember doing my taxes, and you would put entertainer. Or if you would go to try to get a car loan or something, and they'd say, "What do you do?" "Oh, I'm an entertainer." It wasn't even looked at as a real profession, unless you were like on a national level.
Right.
Try to get a car loan, try to get a mortgage, try to get a credit card. It was just so difficult. And one of the things in my quest to learn about this, because my parents really, their interest in representation was only us. When we started getting outside people in the group and everything else, they really wanted nothing to do with it. So that's when I decided I wanted to kind of keep the agency side of things, the production side of things going. So I started looking for information on this, and one of the things, there's just not a lot of information on entertainment business. There were some things related to music or musicians, trying to get a label, trying to land a deal, this and that. There were some things for certain types of performers, like, how to be a successful magician. And, and they all basically said the basics, you know what I mean?
Right.
And one of the things I did when I had my daughter, got married and had my daughter, was try to not be on the road so much. So the two things that I did was I had the agency, as a performer working local or regionally, most of my jobs were in the evening. And during the day, I had the agency, and I also had a second love. I guess it was a hobby, but it was radio. I enjoyed radio back the 70s, 60s, and 70s of personality type radio, not necessarily iPod radio or music mix radio, but where a lot of the DJs or the radio personalities were just as interesting as the music that they played. It was a great 1-2 combination, and they'd all go out and they'd do personal appearances and record hops and things like that. And I was always interested in that. And so when I decided not to go on the road, I also got into radio. And I must say, radio helped me open a lot of doors. It got me into the celebrity scene. I hosted a program called the Celebrity Spotlight, which started on radio and then went to TV. And in interviewing a lot of celebrities, on the air, we would talk about their careers or whatever they were pushing or plugging, but I also was fascinated on the business side of things. And I ended up just being this sponge that would suck up as much information as I could from these well-known entertainers, music, comedy, actors, you name it. And I learned the business from the people themselves on the inside. And through doing this, as you know, when you have different artists and whatnot in your programs, you meet management, agents, managers, and things like that. So it was very satisfying and all-encompassing, and that's where I kind of made the leap from just being an entertainment agency, booking myself. You know, we were booking ourselves, and I remember thinking, boy, this is a lot of work. If I'm doing this to promote myself, I could just as easily be promoting other artists, other acts. That's what happened is I started booking other acts locally and regionally, and clients that had booked me previously but didn't want the same thing 2 years in a row, I would approach them with other acts, bands, entertainers, whatever, comedians, novelty entertainers, specialty entertainers. And that's how the agency started. And then I had met a couple of people. I met Bob Eubanks. Remember the
Newlywed Game? Yeah.
Right. Well, he was a big radio personality out in L.A., and most people don't realize it, but he's also the person that brought the Beatles to L.A.
I do know that. Yeah, he was the promoter for the Hollywood Bowl.
He was the promoter.
Right.
And he, mortgaged or refied his house to get the money to do it. And he was the promoter that put up the money to bring the Beatles to the Hollywood Bowl. And I kind of learned about that part of the business. And then I started understanding, by this point I had a knowledge of the business more than just artist representation. I learned about promoting and producing and following trends or trying to anticipate trends. And I remember it was 1980 or 81. And this may sound silly, but I was very close to my grandparents. And my grandmother, every day at noon, had her story that she watched on TV. It was a soap opera. And she watched this thing religiously. And in the early 80s, the networks, VCRs had come out in 1979, and were starting, by the early 80s, starting to show up in the Nielsen ratings. In other words, there were actually VCR ratings. What were, Nielsen ratings would rank the most viewed live. We only had 3 networks basically back then, but what shows rated the highest? They would base them on their surveys that they did with Nielsen homes. Well, they started doing this with what are the most popularly recorded shows when VCRs came out. Networks started taking notice of this, and long story short, they started targeting things to certain demographics. It used to be that soap operas were only targeted to homemakers and or old ladies. And ABC came up with this thing where they decided we're going to target the young group, younger demographic. In the summer, college kids are off school. They came up with Luke and Laura on General Hospital and Greg and Jenny on All My Children, created a network campaign called Love in the Afternoons. And that's what happened. They started getting a younger demographic. They started becoming among the top-rated programs that were being recorded during the day. People would set their VCRs and then watch them in the evenings. And a couple promoters that I knew, we were talking about this, and there's kind of 2 things you do as a promoter. You follow trends, and you jump on different trends as they're about to happen, and or you try to create trends. And I'll never forget this. My agency had booked Loretta Lynn, country singer Loretta Lynn, to appear at the grand opening of a Kmart. And it was a big call for us when it happened. And it was on a Saturday, I believe it was. And on Thursday, we got a call saying she had laryngitis. She couldn't appear. And earlier that day on my radio program, I had Greg and Jenny from All My Children, which were the big, again, young couple at the time. And, when you have somebody on the air, you get to talk to them a little bit off the air, you exchange phone numbers. And I always did really good interviews with them. And I didn't always ask the same typical questions. And one of the things I had realized, and this is kind of a long-winded story, so I apologize, but it kind of sets the pace because it was a big turning point in my career. In talking to them off the air, I quickly realized that they had no clue as to how popular they were. They had the front burner main storyline on the show. And when we had callers on the air, the phones went wild. People were calling in left and right, and they thought I just had a popular show. And that was not part of, my show was not that phone heavy ever. I could be giving away a new car and I wouldn't get that many calls. So as an entertainer and behind the scenes person, I just started taking notice of this. And I drove with them back to the airport and we're talking, and I realized they hadn't a clue. They had no idea how popular they were. So I said, well, geez, my company, I'll keep you in mind. If we could ever do something with you guys, we'd love to work with you again. Oh, you were great. That'd be fantastic. And then the Kmart deal fell through with Loretta Lynn, and Kmart called in a panic saying, well, we've got to get somebody to replace them. The press is supposed to be, released Thursday and Friday. I ended up calling these two and asked if they would do it. They came out. They did a personal appearance. Long story short, it was like 3,000 or 4,000 people showed up to this Kmart hours before. There were lines outside before the thing even opened up. When I did this, I remember them, for the Loretta Lynn deal, they were going to rent a sound system from our company. So I figured, well, I'll bring a smaller sound system, a couple speakers on stands, and I'll host it. I'll kind of be like the MC to the thing. Because in Kmart's mind, they weren't as popular as Loretta Lynn. Like she wasn't a country legend. I mean, these guys weren't legends like Loretta was. So I kind of used my clout, if you will, or notoriety from being a local radio personality, thinking, geez, because your biggest fear is that nobody's going to
turn up, right?
Or they're all going to be like, where's Loretta? We don't want to see you.
Who are these people?
Or that if you're not a soap opera fan, these two people mean nothing to you. You know, I mean, they were diehard fans, but other than them fans, they could be walking down the street and nobody know who they were.
Right.
So it was really pretty bizarre. So we had them there. It was more successful than I could have dreamed about. And then all of a sudden, I just started having all of these flashbacks of what these different people that were kind of mentors to me or people that helped me learn about the industry were talking about it. And it's like, geez, this soap opera thing is huge. They don't know how big they are. And I had looked into it. They weren't under any kind of personal appearance arrangement with the network. Their deals were to appear on the show and any network promotion that they chose them to do. So if they booked them on Johnny Carson or Merv Griffin or whoever at the time, they would do those shows for network promotion, usually around Sweeps Week or big storyline periods. And I said, well, I'd like to be your representative for personal appearances. And they said, oh, sure. So they came out, they did this appearance. And I kid you not, Douglas, they went back to the studio on Monday, told the cast about this great entertainment agent in Chicago and the great appearance and how many thousands of people showed up. And we had pictures taken. And of course, we couldn't wait to get them developed. They weren't instant back then. And long story short, that was Monday morning. I got a call at about 10 o'clock saying, we've been talking about this weekend, and I've got some other people from the show that would be interested in doing that as well. I said, great, yeah. And can I give them your number? And I said, sure. By 5 o'clock the next day, I had a roster of about 55 different soap opera stars wanting to do personal appearances for my company. And it just, next thing I know, we got good press out of that Kmart appearance. Kmart on the spot started booking us to do all of their grand openings. And because they were targeting the younger audience, I started promoting them to colleges and shopping malls and everything else. And I was one of probably 3 of us throughout the country, because anytime you have a great idea, other people kind of bandwagon jumpers jump on, started doing these shows. And we visited every college, every shopping mall, you name it, we started doing that. And that really got me into doing the production and promoting shows and tours and things like that. And more than just musical acts. Most of my acts had been musical or variety acts up to that point. That kind of led to doing it with sports stars doing it with Nostalgia Stars, and it just kind of has taken off. So we kind of were part of creating that boom or that trend when it happened. We went right from that into the stand-up comedy boom that was big in the mid-'80s, where every bowling alley, every hotel, anybody that had a corner with a mic and a spotlight started doing comedy nights or comedy clubs. So that's how I kind of got into the behind-the-scenes thing and how things worked in unison. I could still perform. Eventually, I divorced and became a single father, so it became really imperative that I have much more control over everything. So I had the agency and the production company, and then I still performed when I could. And my daughter was on the road with me, whether we were at the studio in New York for all my children, or if it was me performing somewhere, or at our personal appearances with the celebrities. So we lived a very interesting life for many, many years.
Well, it was interesting that you mentioned the thing about Kmart. I mean, I don't know do they still do that? I mean, do they still have, not Kmart necessarily, but I can remember when stores and different things would have somebody come. I remember going to a toy store as a little kid in Boston, and Randolph Mantooth from Emergency was there.
Yeah.
You remember that?
I do.
And he was there to open this toy store.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if people do that much anymore. I think that might be kind of a thing.
It is kind of disappeared. It's a shame, because one of the things in our business is you do have to follow industry trends. And, I know the malls used to do that, and they'd all have a center court and a merchants association that was really big on those kind of things. And now most of the center courts are kids' playgrounds or a koi pond or some
a fountain. I was going to say.
Yeah. So they don't do that as much. Car dealerships, for many, many years, car dealerships would always have a lot of athletes out there. Bears, Packers. It didn't matter, and it wasn't just it could be basketball, it could be whatever was big, and they just don't as much. And I think part of the reason is celebrity talent has gotten so expensive. When the reality TV boom started happening, of course, I was watching that trend and decided to kind of revive what I'd always done and adapt it to reality TV stars, because a lot of these shows, I remember when Survivor came out that first year, oh my gosh, it was just, it was super hyped and everybody was talking about it. And, the first year of American Idol was a big deal.
Right,
and so I tried to do that. But the point is, the celebrity talent got so expensive at that point, it outpriced itself to being doable, profitable, or beneficial to a lot of venues. In the old days, you could get a celebrity to come out for, $2,000 or $2,500, and the amount of press and publicity alone that we would get out of it. I mean, TV news coverage, talk shows, radio would be thousands, tens of thousands of dollars. So it was a great investment. But now, when it costs $150,000 to get, Paris Hilton or Kim Kardashian to come out and introduce a song, or to do the countdown at New Year's Eve, or to just make an appearance where they say a few words on the mic, and, it's a whole different game. And it just, I live in Vegas. We still have some places in town that can do that. But, your normal malls, your normal toy stores, your normal car dealerships, it's just outpriced itself, and it's not perceived as the same anymore.
You've got a pretty illustrious list of people here that you said you've worked with. The two I wanted to ask you about, if you had any interesting stories. One was George Burns, and the other one is the Beach Boys.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. George Burns was one of the people. George Burns and Steve Allen, the original host of The Tonight Show,
right,
were two of the guys that really would for some reason, I think they liked me, which was great, and they just wanted to help me. I don't know what it was. I was just so grateful, and I still am. I go to their performances, and we'd hang out backstage. I go with them to media interviews. Sometimes it was the talking in the back of the limo on the way to there, or the green room, or the dressing room before a show. But they really taught me about the business, going back to old vaudeville, and hearing how everybody traveled back then by train. That's why all the theaters, the vaudeville theater houses were all along the rail lines. When you hear of something playing in Peoria, the reason Peoria became good is because it was a big town that was right on the rail line. Chicago, Milwaukee, all of these great towns. So I heard some great stories. Now, in the later years, George wanted to keep performing, and luckily was still mentally sharp. All of those old-time guys, I don't know what it was about them, Bob Hope, Steve Allen, George, Rickles, all of those guys just seemed to have this massive collection, both physically at home in their offices, but mentally in their heads, of thousands and thousands and thousands of jokes and liners for all occasions. If you're coming out of a place and the valet guy comes up, they've got something, Tom Dreesen, who was a comedian, it was Sinatra's opening act for many, many years, would tell me the story that he loved going out with Frank because he would always like to tip the valet guy very handsomely, and he would always ask the guy, what is the biggest tip you've ever received? And then he would outdo it. And they were in Vegas. They would do Vegas quite a bit. And I think they were at one of the older ones, Sahara maybe, or one of those. I don't remember. But anyway, the valet guy comes around, and Frank says to him, what's the largest tip you've ever received? And he said, well, that would be $100, sir. So Frank gives him, I don't know, 150, 200 bucks, and walked away. And Tom's just laughing because he sees this happen all the time. And he says, who gave you the biggest tip? Who gave you that $100 tip before? He goes, well, Mr. Sinatra, last time he was here. So he kind of was playing Frank, and Frank was outdoing himself most of the time. But George Burns was very sharp. And it got to the point where he barely could walk and he could barely stand. So when he did his shows, these are the last, I don't know, maybe 5 years of his life. And I was fortunate enough to be part of all of that. And he had kind of a big high-backed chair, like you would see, like a throne, if you will, and two gorgeous girls, probably 70 years younger, would escort him out. And, of course, the standing ovation, all he had to do was walk out, and it was a standing ovation for 5 minutes. And then he'd sit down. The girls would help him get situated. He had a smoking stand next to him, so he'd sit down, light up a cigar, and at some point then the girls would leave, right about the time the applause would die down. And, of course, he'd make a few comments, and it was just a great thing. Even then, he adapted the performance dynamics to what he could and couldn't do. He couldn't stand for 75 minutes. So he had this it suited him very well. But, I've got a lot of different liners and things, but the one thing that he told me, and of course, when you get to be that age, it's kind of like the lovable grandpa. You go through your period when you get in your 50s and 60s, and if you look at a younger person, or 40s, 50s, and 60s, if you look at a younger person, they look at you like, ooh, old guy. Well, you get to a certain point where you're just lovable again, and everybody wants to hug you and everything else, and George had that going for him. And I remember he'd walk away, or somebody come up to him, and after they'd walk away, he'd look at me and he'd wink. And he'd say, Robin, you're only as old as the women you feel. He was a great guy. A master of comedic timing, a master of writing, a master of working the crowd, of filling the stage, just as a performer and as somebody behind the scenes. He would talk about, multiple streams of income before that was a term in business. He goes, oh yeah, well, you got this, and then you can do that, and you can sell this, and he had merchandising and everything else. He had a program, and it was I just learned so much from him. And now the Beach Boys were very cool in a different way, because I grew up with them. I knew George Burns. I was too young to really remember his TV show and much with Gracie. I know one of the things George would tell me all the time is Gracie did not want to be that George Burns and Gracie Allen. She didn't want to be part of the act. She hated it. And George, after every contract was up, she'd say, that's it, George. And then George would go renew for another year without telling her. And, they did that for 4 or 5 times. And finally she said, that's it. And that was truly it. But, the Beach Boys followed them for years. And, there's a couple of different camps in the Beach Boys. You know, there's the Brian Wilson camp, there's the Mike Love camp.
Right? Yes.
You know, so you kind of got to be careful. I've known Brian. I worked with Brian on some on his Imagine project in the 80s. He actually, most people don't realize this, but it was recorded in part, and he lived in Chicagoland, in the suburbs of Chicago, out in St. Charles, Illinois. And I knew, because I was from radio and TV in the area, I knew a lot of people, and I just got brought in on a lot of things and got to hang with them. And he was with Melinda at this point. I don't know if you've seen the movie Love and Mercy, but great story, kind of a biopic on the Beach Boys, but more so Brian, and how he went through that whole thing with Dr. Landy, and in a lot of ways he helped him get fit and probably saved his life, but in the other ways he took very much control and alienated him from almost everybody else. On the other side of that, he meets Melinda, who is his now wife, and she is a very strong person that kind of went to fight for Brian regardless of who or what she had to go up against, and wouldn't back down. And during this period, he was healthy. They had a couple of kids of their own, younger kids again, and he was kind of convinced, set on doing things differently and right, and being more in control. And I don't want to say coming back, but he'd been away from things commercially as we know it for a long time, and now he was doing solo shows, which years ago he would have never done. And Bruce Johnston came out, and he was part of the session. And so that's gone on. And then I've also been kind of on the fringe of the Mike Love camp through John. John Stamos is somebody that I've worked with back in the soap opera days. Most people forget, but he started out on the soap
General
opera.
Hospital, yeah. He was Blackie,
yeah, Blackie
right?
Parrish.
Yes.
I remember being at my very first daytime Emmy Awards. Soap operas and game shows were becoming so big back in the 80s. I remember Phil Donahue was the host of one of them, and he said that most people don't realize it, but it's the revenue that these daytime programs are generating that's allowing the nighttime shows to have these big budgets like Dallas and Dynasty and all those things that were on then. And of course, game shows were having nighttime versions then too. So I'm at this Emmy Awards, and these were all just young up and comers, but it's like, okay, over here, here's John, here's Demi Moore, here's Rick Springfield. They're all soap, I don't want to say just soap opera actresses, but they were just in the earlier parts of their careers. And of course, now they're all, big stars. So
right.
That was a very cool time. And, of course, Susan Lucci hadn't won one yet. So she was, the big thing was her losing every year. And so I don't know. But I know John and not real close with him, but, he was really close. He was a lifelong Beach Boy fan growing up in Southern California, and connected with the Beach Boys more, Mike Love and everybody, and still performs with them from time to time. And, when John hit it big on Full House, the Beach Boys were on. And, it's so cool because I work with a lot of groups. I represent a lot of groups now from the 60s and 70s. But I don't think there is anybody like the Beach Boys. I mean, talk about 3 or 4 generations of people now. Everybody, there's not many shows that a family from kids to grandparents can go to together and all enjoy on their own level. And especially when the Beach Boys hit in the 80s with Kokomo, that kind of just cemented them into this, whole new generation and the family appeal. And I'm telling you, to this day, if you get a chance to see either of them, Brian's solo show tour or Mike's Beach Boys, it's a good time. I really can't see people going to it and not walking away having a great time. So definitely a lot of maturity, a lot of, Mike is very pure and into meditation, transcendental meditation. The drugs aren't there. The drinking's not there like it used to be. And it's all about entertaining and putting on a good show with some great classic music that everybody knows. And they're 75, 76 now. So, I look at my parents that are that age and say, geez, I couldn't see them doing this. They barely listen to the radio.
I think I saw the Beach Boys in 1977. That was the last time I saw them. So it was a long time ago. But I do remember it being a good show. But Brian wasn't there. I don't think he was touring at that point.
No, that was probably right before it. And then when the Kokomo thing happened, it depends who you listen to. Brian will say he wasn't invited to be part of it. Mike will tell you he invited Brian to be part of that, writing it, and for whatever reason he really didn't. It was Mike, it was Scott McKenzie, and John Phillips from the Mamas and Papas wrote that. And it's a typical Mike Love song in the sense, one of the things Mike is genius for is stringing together a bunch of common things, like, in Surfing USA, how they name all of the Southern California beaches, Redondo, Manhattan, Sunset. And he did the same thing, California girls, East Coast, West Coast, North, South. And Kokomo was the same thing. You can tell Mike's contribution to it, Aruba, Jamaica, and he just starts naming all of these exotic locales. And, but when they started doing that, what happened is they started doing the TV appearances. They were on Full House. They were on, Home Improvement with Tim Allen and, so on and so forth. And, funny storyline on that one. Their neighbor that hid behind the fence, his name was Wilson. And come to find out, he was the same Wilson as the Beach Boys. So they were relatives, the way they wrote that in. But, since they started getting a family audience, their show became very family. In other words, there were cheerleaders, there were dancing hula girls, and so on and so forth. And a lot of your hardcore Beach Boy fans thought it was becoming too commercial or too, family friendly. It was like when Kiss started having dolls and everything else, and they stopped being that bad rock group, that heavy metal rock group, and they started becoming a commercial success. They lost a lot of people there, and people look at it as selling out or whatever else. So in the 80s, the Beach Boys started doing that. I personally liked that. I liked the cheerleaders. I liked the whole family part of it. At the end of the show, when they did Barbara Ann, all of them would come out with their wives or spouses, their kids. A lot of them had like their second wave of little kids. So, and they'd all come out and they'd do Barbara Ann, and the stage was filled with, it was a family show, but a lot of your original purists haven't cared for that. And Mike has kind of taken a bum rap on that part of things from Beach Boy fans. I liked it. I think it kept them relevant, up with the times, commercial. But, a lot of people say if Dennis was here, he wouldn't have gone along with that. If Brian was in it, he wouldn't have played along with that nonsense. So it's, what I like is they're still out there. That's the main thing. It's still good music. They still sound pretty good. And they're timeless.
What do you think happened between Mike and Brian? Do you think it was just business, or was it more than that?
They've been different almost since the beginning. I think Mike is very commercial. Mike did not want to get away from the car songs and the surfing songs and that California beach style that they made so famous. Hey, this is our big formula. It's worked well. We don't want to rock the boat. And many people felt that way. Murray, who was Brian, Carl, and Dennis's dad, was their manager, and he was kind of the same way. He ruled the group with an iron fist. And this was back in the day where people disciplined their kids differently than what is acceptable now. And Brian was an artist. Back to the earlier part of our conversation where a lot of people don't want to deal with the business side of things. That's right. Brian to a T. Brian could be the poster boy for that. And he was very creative and really looked up to Phil Spector and what he was doing in the studio and his wall of sound and layering things in multi-tracks. And of course the 4-part harmony, the Beach Boys harmony, was something that was there from the beginning. That was kind of the foundation.
Right.
So he wanted to combine that harmony with that thicker sound and the multi-layers. And Brian has just always been able to hear or picture things that mere mortals, like Love will say, mere mortals can't even imagine, And that was the difference. Mike wanted to be commercial and wanted to keep the formula going, and the measure of success might have been top 40 hits or how well a song did on the charts, airplay, sales. Where Brian wanted to he was inspired by the Beatles. He liked Rubber Soul. He did Pet Sounds. Then, of course, that influenced Sgt. Pepper's. And, there was that creativeness and that rivalry, and I think all along there was that same kind of differences between Mike and Brian. Mike was not the partier or into substances like maybe Brian did. Mike certainly contributed and felt that Murray kind of took that away from him or kept that from him or did some shady business dealings in it. And after many years of hearing about Brian was the genius and Brian was the Beach Boys and this and that, yet Mike was the front man. And Mike was the one out there when Brian refused to go on the road, which you got to remember happened in '65. So barely a few years out of the gate, you know.
Yeah,
so
he stopped. Yeah.
Huh?
No, I said you're right. He wasn't just a couple of years into it, and he was quitting already on stage. Yeah.
You know, a lot of people think, oh, he dropped out in the '70s. No, you know, he dropped out. He dropped out. He had a breakdown on a plane. I think he was coming back from Dallas or something, or going to Dallas, and they had a breakdown, and he just decided he wasn't going to tour anymore. They brought in Glenn Campbell to do Brian's bass playing and high parts, and when it was deemed that, and Glenn was a studio musician, part of the Wrecking Crew, so he played on a lot of Beach Boys studio cuts. So he did it for a while, but that wasn't his forte either. Now, he wasn't the solo artist that we know him as at that point. And so then they decided they needed somebody else. They called Bruce Johnston, who they had known, and asked him to call anybody they could find that would be willing to take Brian's spot. The story goes Bruce called about 10 different people, and they all said no. So he said, I guess I'll do it. And he got on a plane, flew to New Orleans, did the first show, and he's been a staple ever since. He's not one of the originals, but he's been there for the long haul. But so Brian had been gone for a long time, and Mike was kind of the guy that kept the Beach Boys out there. You know, I mean, Carl and Dennis. Carl was very serious about the Beach Boys and kind of felt that he had to take over and try to fill some of the void from Brian. Dennis was kind of the sex symbol partier. Again, not really concerned about the business side of things as much. And where I think the true interesting thing is with the Beach Boys is Murray, their father, formed Sea of Tunes, which was their publishing company. And then after they fired him, they formed their own brothers record label and brothers management company. And I just can't imagine how anything got done or accomplished or decided with, not that they were at odds with each other, they were just such different people with different preferences or interests, you know. But somehow, some way, through certain people, there was definitely a revolving door of management that came in and out of things. And I think all of them made their marks on things. You know, Jerry Schilling, who was one of Elvis's guys, became a manager in the late '70s, and they all played a key role in keeping Brian alive, getting him through that whole thing, dealing with all of the tragedies and infighting, whether they were lawsuits, whether they were Dennis passing and a drowning and all that. So talk about a story. You can't write stuff like this, and yet you can hear the story from 4 or 5 different people from the group and get 4 or 5 different variations of it.
Well, I've always been interested in the Beach Boys story. It's one of the most interesting ones that you don't hear a lot about. Everybody knows the Beatles story from cover to cover, but the Beach Boys story you don't hear. And no, I haven't seen that movie yet, although I wanted to see it, but it got terrible reviews.
And I'm surprised. I really liked it. I think, again, there's different camps and different,
Right.
I think people will look at it through a different set of eyes. But
I like Paul Dano. I think he's a great actor.
Oh, yeah. And Elizabeth Banks, who played Melinda in the movie, was a very strong, she did, I thought the movie was well acted, well played. I thought it was well, if you listen to Mike Love's Camp, they're going to say, oh, well, it downplayed Mike's role just like Brian has for years. But the point was, I don't think it was supposed to be the Beach Boys story. It was more of Brian's,
Yeah.
And other than what Brian did for the Beach Boys in the studio, I think there was a lot of distance put between them after that. And they come together and they drift apart, and then there were lawsuits. And I don't think it was over not liking each other and everything else as much as it was dollars and business. And And there was some neglect and some shadiness when Murray was behind them. And I think they each had different ways of dealing with that, and I think that's what the catalyst was. But I think I'd be curious to see. I think you should see the movie, and I think you would like it. Even just a mild Beach Boys fan would. I think it's much like Jersey Boys to people that never knew the Four Seasons or Frankie Valli story. It kind of, at least, even on that level, is a good story. But if you know anything about the Brian story, I think you would really like it. I really do.
Well, I am going to watch it now.
All right.
Let me get to your book here real quick. We're kind of running out of time, but I do want to just touch on this quickly. Your book is called The Entertainment Career and Business Opportunity Directory, and it's a professional business resource detailing the top 40 live entertainment business opportunities available today. Well, that was a mouthful. Can you tell us in 2 minutes or less what your book is about?
Yeah. Basically, what I do nowadays, besides my agency and performing, is threefold. I teach, educate, and work with, let people know about the different jobs, careers, and business opportunities that are available in live entertainment. So these are things can be home-based businesses, whether you want to be a disc jockey, whether you want to, learn, do kids parties, you want to do magic. There's a lot of different things, even local entertainment agencies or party planning services. I also work with corporate clients, schools, churches, and charities, and people that want to use entertainment for business, profit, or fundraising. And then, of course, I work with different entertainers on the business sides of their operations. And this directory is 40 of the top entertainment businesses. People can run part-time. They can do as a business. They can do as a home-based business. And, for variety entertainers, musical entertainers, kids and family entertainers, novelty entertainers. And then for people that don't want to be a performer, but just want to run an entertainment business like an agency or a promoter or a guest speaking bureau or something like that, there's a lot of opportunities where you can operate an entertainment business without being a performer. And so I broke down 40 different of those kinds of opportunities: startup cost, what it entails, income potential, and so on and so forth.
So this is a home-based booking agency that you could create?
No. We're a national agency. Luckily, what I had been doing was nationwide, and then with the internet, it's allowed me to book internationally. But there are a lot of people that don't think of entertainment as a business opportunity or a career opportunity. And one of the trends right now are local entertainment agencies, somebody that serves, maybe their local community or a 60-mile radius or something like that book weddings, that book fairs and festivals, that book kids and family entertainment, that book schools and things like that. So whether you're a full-service agency, maybe you want to be a specialty agency where you're just a disc jockey service, you only specialize in one kind of entertainment, or you want to be a family entertainment agency that might have storytellers, face painters, clowns, magicians, inflatables. There's all kinds of different entertainment opportunities and a lot of people have storefronts or offices, but a lot of these could be done as home-based businesses as well.
Okay. Well, this sounds real fascinating, and I'm sorry that we're just about running out of time because I'd like to get into that more.
Well, people can learn more. The website is entertainmentopportunities.com, and they can see the book, and there's even a free report that people can request to learn more about the book and the different opportunities. So
super. Well, Robinn, thank you so much for coming on the show. And actually, I would like to invite you back, and we could do Robinn Lange Part 2, because I think we definitely could go another hour easily.
Anytime you want to talk show business or entertainment business, let me know. That's one of those things we could talk forever on it. So
I think so.
Keep me in mind.
Okay, Robinn. Thanks. Take care.
Thank
now.
you, Doug.
Well, that's about all the time we've got for the show today. I want to thank my special guest, Robinn Lange. This is Douglas Coleman saying goodbye.